Welcome back to Al-Asad. My name is Martell, and in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about this book, Prophetic Grappling. We had discussed doing book reviews and other interesting things that bring up cultural aspects of the Middle East and in countries that we find interesting. So we're going to start with this one. It's by Nisar Shaikh. It came out this year, 2022, and it's called Prophetic Grappling. And it's referring to prophetic being grappling in the time of Prophet Muhammad and his companions. I mainly bought this because it has this treaty by Imam Sayuti translated in it, which is in English, it translates to like from swiftly to wrestling, I guess you can say. That's how he translated it anyway. The book is pretty interesting. It's not a very difficult to read book. It has plenty of interesting tidbits in it. This is the table of contents we see here. It has Part 1, History of Grappling in Islamic Civilization. Part 2 is Martial Warriors Amongst the Companions. Part 3 is Objective of Sports in Islam. And then Part 4 is Swiftly to Wrestling, which is the main reason I bought this book, because I wanted to see what this treaty actually talked about and what it said. So this is the treaty part. You can see it takes up probably not so much as half, but a good part of the book. And what I like about books that have treaties is when they actually print the treaty in the language, and then they print a translation after it. This particular one has the original Arabic, then the translation, and then a commentary as well. The commentary is done by the Nisar Shaikh, it's a good commentary. So this is written by Imam Jalaluddin Sayuti in 849 Hijri, which is, well, he was born in 849 Hijri, which translates to 1445 of our common era. So this is basically a 15th century treatise, but it's referring back to 7th century Arabia. Imam Sayuti is extremely famous. He is known as Egyptian because he was born in Cairo, but his family actually is Persian. He's extremely famous. He's a master in multiple sciences. He's written a lot, and you can just Google him if you're interested. He has a pretty large Wikipedia page dedicated to him. So the treaty itself breaks down into a bunch of narrations, which in Arabic they're called hadith. So it'll be hadith 2, 3, 4, and each one is an event that happened either during the life of Prophet Muhammad or during the life of his companions. And it's about wrestling. Everyone has wrestling in it, but it's not necessarily wrestling techniques. It's more like the events and the culture around wrestling, and when they used wrestling, what wrestling was used for. So it's interesting from a cultural perspective and shows how wrestling was such a basis of fighting and everything that comes from that, in other in other things as well. And I believe the author mentions that in the the chapters before you get to the treaty. But we can extrapolate from that when we use footwork and this type of thing that isn't mentioned in other treaties. We can kind of assume that it would be footwork and movement with the core being wrestling. So while this document here, this treaty, was from the 15th century, it's referencing 7th century Arabia and events that were occurring there. I just wanted to point out this is a short one, narration 11th or the 11th hadith. And I'll read it quick here and just show you how wrestling was used in his specific events. So I'll just read the English part. The Prophet would inspect the young men of the Ansar every year. Whoever amongst them attained maturity, he would accept for military service. During an inspection one year, a young man passed by him, and he sent him to join the army. Then Samora was assessed by him thereafter, but was rejected. Samora said, "O Messenger of God, you permitted a young man, but rejected me, whereas if he was to wrestle me, I would defeat him." He said, "Go wrestle him." And he said, "Go wrestle him." He said, "So I took him down. He thus permitted me to join the army." So here you can see that Samora was not physically, probably I'm assuming by what they mean maturity, physically he was not at the level that they considered maturity. So he was probably still thin. If you look at kids nowadays, you can clearly see when young kids, young boys, we're talking here, would hit maturity or puberty, they have growth spurts or they get more muscle mass, etc. But the Prophet Muhammad used wrestling as a basis here because Samara said, look, I can out-wrestle him. So why are you letting him in the army and not me? And that is a perfectly valid statement. And so he said, okay, go prove it. And he did. And thus he was allowed to join the army. So like I was saying, you can see how much of a core culturally wrestling was back then. And pretty much through up until modern times, we can say wrestling in the Middle East region is a huge thing. Another thing you can look at with this one here is that the character, like this, I was saying how it talks about culture and stuff a lot in this book. So we can see the character of Prophet Muhammad and his companions in trying to be just with the people. And in this case, it was the youth, where he was like, okay, it wouldn't be just to let one person and not someone who is clearly a better fighter in some sense than him to join the army. And we also see like how he made an exception to the general rule that you had to reach maturity to join the army. In Islam, maturity is marked as when you are supposed to actually practice Islam. As a child, you're not held accountable for doing anything with regards to Islamic practice, other than be like a good kid, I guess. But for instance, like praying and fasting and joining the military and these types of things, you do not have to do until you've hit maturity. That's kind of the age, that's the marker of when you're then obligated to actually practice the religion in itself. So I just wanted to point that out. There's a bunch of narrations. It's an excellent little treaty. Like I said, it's not so much about wrestling techniques, but rather culture and tidbits into character development and these other things that come with martial arts and activities in this regard. So, with that being said, if you're interested in this book, I bought it on Amazon and it was relatively inexpensive. This is a hardback version, but there is a softback as well. Check it out. Thanks for watching and have a good day.